This was the final aerial battle between American and Japanese forces in World War II. Even though surrender had already been announced, the Japanese military still refused to play by the rules, and launched an attack on the Americans. It is known as the Atsugi Airfield dogfight. In this video, I'll take you through the entire sequence of this battle. Early on the morning of August 15, 1945, Lieutenant Harrison of the U.S. Navy was leading 6 Hellcat fighters on a mission toward the Tokyo area. Their target was Atsugi Airfield, where a group of Japanese fighters was out on patrol. Harrison soon spotted the airfield. The American pilots prepared to launch their attack. Harrison armed his rockets and dove toward the base. His finger hovered over the firing button, the target drawing closer and closer. But just then, they suddenly received a transmission. "We did it!" Cheers erupted over the radio. The Hellcat squadron turned back for home, with the pilots rolling and looping their planes, celebrating their victory to the fullest. Yet, as they were heading back, Japanese fighters quietly closed in on them. Japanese Navy Ensign Masayuki Morioka, watching the Americans celebrate, felt a deep sense of despair. Although he knew what had happened, he still refused to believe it. Then, a radio message came through. Japan had surrendered and lost the war. Morioka looked at the hand he had lost during an earlier battle against American bombers. At this moment, some Japanese pilots obeyed the order to return. But Morioka saw this as his last chance for revenge. So, he made his move. Morioka dove his fighter toward the American planes, with his wingmen following close behind. It was a completely dishonorable ambush. Harrison looked back and saw the Japanese planes had a 1,200-meter altitude advantage. Harrison slammed the throttle forward. He ordered his squadron to turn around, climb, and engage the Japanese planes. Although the Japanese aircraft were armed with 20mm cannons, Harrison knew their armor was incredibly thin. If they could lay down enough machine gun fire on the Japanese, maybe they could pull off a win. As both sides closed in at high speed, the pilots locked onto their targets. Then, they opened fire. The planes from both squadrons weaved and crossed through each other. Tongues of fire spat out from their guns. For a brief, fleeting moment, Harrison and Morioka locked eyes. The American fighters broke formation and scattered. Harrison and his wingmen juked left and right. 2-0 fighters poured gunfire in their direction. "Break, break, I'm going right." Harrison dove and accelerated. The Japanese pilot stayed glued to his tail. The two of them were locked in a spiraling dogfight. Both men were desperate to get the other into their sights. For Harrison, there was only one way to shake him. He waited for the perfect moment. His eyes darted quickly across the airspeed and altitude gauges, and then he yanked the stick back hard. He instantly cut speed and shot into a steep climb. The Japanese plane pulled up, following him closely. Harrison's engine roared as it was pushed to the absolute limit. Massive G-force pinned him hard against his seat. For an instant, Harrison was completely exposed to the Japanese pilot. Cannon shells whistled right past his cockpit canopy. Harrison didn't panic. He turned and watched as that Japanese fighter flashed right underneath him. Just like that, the Japanese plane stalled out. It flipped over and started to plummet. Harrison's own plane nearly stalled at the peak of the climb. He hauled back on the stick with all his might. And finally, he locked onto his target. The Zero fighter filled up Harrison's gun sight. He pulled the trigger. The machine guns of the Hellcat fighter unleashed a hail of bullets, striking the target. The Zero's fuel tank ignited, shooting out flames. The Zero flipped over rapidly, then spiraled downward, trailing thick, black smoke. Harrison pulled back on the throttle and scanned the area. The intense dogfight was still raging. It was his wingman, Hobbs. A Japanese fighter was latched onto Hobbs's tail. He was pulling desperate evasive maneuvers to dodge the incoming shells. Harrison slammed the throttle forward and dove back into the fray, screaming down toward that Japanese fighter. The Japanese pilot didn't even notice the Hellcat closing in from above. Harrison locked onto his target and pulled the trigger, Shell after shell slammed into the target. The Japanese plane exploded instantly, with debris tearing through the sky. Meanwhile, two pilots, Hansen and Proctor, were head-on against three Japanese fighters charging toward them. Hansen strafed the first Japanese plane, tearing a chunk right off its wing. The plane spiraled down toward the ground. The second Japanese plane opened fire immediately, bullets whizzing right over Hansen's cockpit. Hansen adjusted his aim, and blew that Japanese plane to pieces. But the third Japanese fighter was still closing in, pouring shells at him relentlessly. Hansen had no time to aim, so he could only bank hard to the right. By then, Proctor behind him was locked and ready. As the Japanese plane flew past, he saw his perfect shot. Proctor shot down that Japanese fighter, snapping its wing clean off, and sending it crashing down. But before they could even celebrate their victory, a call came over the radio. Emergency distress call from a nearby dogfight. It's Solov. The third pair, U.S. pilots Solov and Mandelberg, are being fiercely attacked by a Japanese fighter. Their plane takes hit after hit. Then, Solov sees an explosion. Mandelberg's fighter is already on fire and spiraling down. More cannon shells tear into Salov's plane. Inside the cockpit of the fighter locked onto Salov's tail. The Japanese pilot is feeling smug. He's calmly picking off the American plane. But he doesn't notice another pair of American fighters diving in to save them. Proctor slides in behind the Japanese fighter. His machine guns open fire in an instant. The Japanese plane immediately spins and plummets toward the ground. Proctor flies over to his wingman, but by now, Salov's engine is severely damaged. The wings and tail are riddled with bullet holes. They roll away and break off, heading toward the edge of the battlefield. Salov's propeller starts to fail. The nose dips, and the plane begins a rapid descent. Solov struggles to control his crippled aircraft. Warning lights are flashing, and the instruments are spinning wildly out of control. He fights with the control stick, but the control surfaces are completely unresponsive. They see a parachute deploy from the plane, but it's too low. They watch helplessly as Solov slams into the ocean. 6 Japanese fighters come tearing in from the front. The two pilots climb into the clouds, looking for cover. Behind them is a pack of Japanese fighters in hot pursuit. The cloud cover gets thicker and thicker. They lose contact. Meanwhile, another flight of Hellcats is racing toward the coast at full speed. Harrison and Hobbs are also trying to escape. Suddenly, Morioka streaks down from the sky, followed closely by his wingman. Harrison doesn't even have time to react. He yanks on the stick, but it's already too late. The autocannon shells slammed into Harrison's plane. He could feel his fighter shaking violently. Hobbs didn't break away. He slammed the throttle forward, and turned straight into the attacker. He strafed at Morioka, but his aim was off. The bullets streaked past the Japanese plane. Morioka ignored the incoming fire, and kept his sights locked on the target. He opened fire again. A hail of shells hit the center of the American plane dead on. The Hellcat fighter exploded in an instant, leaving behind nothing but a plume of smoke and falling debris. Seething with rage, Hobbs dived to pursue the Japanese fighter. Hobbs got Morioka in his sights and pulled the trigger. Machine gun bullets tore into the Zero's wings, but Morioka managed to shake him off. Hobbs was so focused on Morioka's plane that he forgot what was behind him. It wasn't until shells ripped into his own plane that Hobbs finally saw Morioka's wingman diving in from behind. Shrapnel tore through the cockpit and struck Hobbs. Flames began to consume his cockpit. He had to bail out. Hobbs barely managed to blow the canopy and jump from the plane. Then his fighter plummeted toward the sea. Hobbs dangled beneath his parachute, while his plane burned and spiraled below him. Morioka and his wingman roared past and vanished into the distance. By now, Hobbs could barely feel anything happening around him. He slowly lost consciousness and died before he even hit the ground. High above, Hansen burst through a bank of clouds. He scanned the skies, but found he was all alone. Hansen stared down at the ocean and plotted his course back to the USS Yorktown. Suddenly, a voice came through the headset. Hansen flew at full throttle toward the aircraft carrier. This proved that at least one other person was still alive. His fighter jet landed on the deck. He jumped out of the cockpit, scanning the sky and the deck. He couldn't see a trace of any other planes. His heart sank. Could the other fighter have crashed into the sea as well? Just then, the other fighter appeared. It was Proctor. His plane was battered and scarred, but he managed to land it on the carrier. The two reunited on the flight deck. In the end, they were the only two who survived. After the war, Morioka claimed that the American fighter had not jettisoned its rockets, and that he had fired rockets at Atsugi Airfield after Japan's surrender. He insisted that his attack was justified. 9 Japanese pilots and 4 American pilots lost their lives in this air battle, which ultimately brought the Pacific War to a close.